As the handcuffs clicked around my wrists under the chaotic flash of red and blue lights, the officer thought he had caught a fleeing suspect. He had no idea the woman smiling at his gun was the only person who could dismantle this entire charade in under 1 hour. The worst part was not my license abandoned in the wrecked car. It was the sickening reason my own family needed me locked in a cell before dawn. My name is Camila Bishop, and tonight I became a fugitive. The rain was little more than a persistent, freezing mist against my windshield when the world outside exploded into a blinding frenzy of red and blue. It was not just a single cruiser pulling me over for a broken taillight. 3 patrol cars boxed me in on the slick, black asphalt of Interstate 95, moving in a highly coordinated tactical maneuver that pinned my sedan against the concrete median. The glaring beams of their high-intensity spotlights sliced through the darkness, blinding me completely and turning the gentle raindrops into a swarm of frantic, glowing silver needles. Over the deafening wail of the sirens, a harsh electronic loudspeaker shattered the night air, vibrating right through the glass of my windows. "Driver, turn off the engine. Drop the keys out the window. Place your hands outside the vehicle where we can see them. Do it right now." The voice belonged to a man riding the absolute peak of adrenaline. This was a felony takedown, the kind you see on the news when the police believe the person inside the car has nothing left to lose. I did exactly as I was commanded. I killed the engine, the sudden silence inside the cabin contrasting violently with the chaos outside. I tossed my keys onto the wet pavement and thrust my empty hands into the freezing night air. The rain immediately soaked the cuffs of my silk blouse, plastering the fabric to my skin. Use your left hand to open the door from the outside. Step out slowly. Keep your hands raised. Walk backwards toward the sound of my voice. Every primitive survival instinct in my body screamed at me to panic, to cry, to beg for an explanation, but my professional training kicked in. At Aster Grid Mobility Risk Labs, panic was the enemy of clarity. Panic meant a failure to parse the incoming data. I forcibly lowered my heart rate. I focused solely on the mechanics of respiration. Inhale through the nose for 4 seconds. Hold the breath for 2 seconds. Exhale through the mouth for 4 seconds. As my low heels touched the slick shoulder of the highway, I finally saw the reality of my situation. At least 4 officers were positioned behind their reinforced vehicle doors. Their service weapons were drawn, the black muzzles leveled squarely at my chest and head. The tension in the air was so dense it felt physical. The silence between the officers' shouted commands was deafening, thick enough that I swore I could hear the frantic, uneven thudding of the young rookie's heart standing 15 feet away. "Get down on your knees. Cross your ankles. Do not move." The wet, oily grit of the asphalt bit sharply through the fabric of my slacks, scraping the skin of my knees. Rough, uncompromising hands grabbed my arms, hauling me roughly upward and slamming me face first onto the freezing, wet metal hood of a patrol car. The violent shock of the cold steel sent a dull ache radiating through my ribs. The sharp, unforgiving bite of the handcuffs clamped down hard around my wrists, biting into the bone. The metallic ratchet of the locking mechanism echoed in the wet air like a gunshot. "Camila Bishop, you are under arrest for felony hit and run involving severe bodily injury and evading the scene of a crime." The officer pressing my cheek into the hood was practically panting. He yanked me upright, spinning me around to face him. He looked young, perhaps 25 years old, but his dark eyes held a profound, deeply personal disgust. He was looking at me not as a citizen, but as a monster who had discarded human life like garbage. "You have the right to remain silent," he began, reciting the Miranda warning with a tremor of barely contained righteous rage. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney, a felony hit and run, severe bodily injury." My brain processed these terrifying data points with sterile, detached efficiency. They knew my full name before they even approached my car. They did not ask for my license or registration. They approached with lethal force ready to deploy. They were furiously angry. This meant the narrative had already been completely written, polished, and handed to the authorities on a silver platter. The police had been fed a comprehensive, airtight story before I even knew I was a character in it. "We found the abandoned SUV," a second officer muttered. Stepping into my field of vision, he wore a heavy yellow slicker that dripped dirty water onto my leather shoes. "And we found your wallet right there on the driver's side floorboard. Miss Bishop, you really thought you could just walk away into the night after putting 2 innocent people in the intensive care unit?" My wallet on the floorboard. The scattered puzzle pieces of the last 72 hours snapped together with a violent, sickening clarity as the young officer shoved his hand against my shoulder. Guiding me toward the cramped back seat of his cruiser, my mind raced backward in time. 3 days ago, the grand emotional reconciliation dinner at Le Petit Chien, the most expensive restaurant in Stonemere Hills. My mother, Elaine, had practically demanded the gathering, insisting we mend all familial fences before the upcoming wedding, the absolute social and financial event of the season. My sister, Sloane, the eternal golden child of the Bishop dynasty, had thrown her arms around my neck at the coat check. She had sobbed dramatically, pressing her tear-stained face into the lapel of my charcoal coat, begging for a fresh start. But in that moment, I had felt a momentary, vague annoyance. She had held me just a fraction of a second too long. Her manicured hands had fumbled against my deep pocket. I had not checked my secondary leather clutch since that evening. My spare driver's license was gone. Sloane. It was always Sloane. From wrecked European sports cars in high school to stolen corporate credit cards in college. My father Martin and my mother had always paved over her trail of destruction with their immense wealth and political influence. But a felony hit and run, especially one resulting in severe injuries, right before her multi-million-dollar merger of a marriage to Grant Holloway, that was a catastrophic liability. A scandal of that magnitude triggered the morality clauses in their prenuptial and investment agreements. It was a mess that money alone could not scrub clean. To save the empire, they needed a scapegoat. They needed someone who fit the demographic profile of the driver. They needed the estranged daughter who already had a reputation for being difficult. They needed me. "Not gonna say anything?" the young arresting officer sneered, slamming his heavy hand on the roof of the cruiser as I ducked my head and slid into the cramped, plastic-lined back seat. "Cat got your tongue now that the adrenaline is wearing off and you are sober?" Every human instinct inside my chest screamed at me to fight. I wanted to yell that I had been fast asleep in my apartment, that I had not driven a vehicle in over 48 hours, that my darling sister was a reckless sociopath who had just framed her own flesh and blood for a blood-soaked crime. But I clamped my jaw tightly shut. I knew exactly how the criminal justice system processed hysteria. Protestations of frantic innocence on the side of a rainy highway only made you look desperate, erratic, and undeniably guilty. Emotional reactions were a massive liability. To tear down a lie this massive, I needed cold, hard, irrefutable data, and I knew exactly where to find it. I let the heavy reinforced door slam shut, sealing me inside a suffocating microclimate smelling of stale sweat, wet vinyl, and chemical cleaner. Outside, the officers were busy securing my vehicle, their shoulder radios buzzing with harsh, continuous static. Inside the cage, the darkness offered a brief, necessary sanctuary to think. I leaned my wet head back against the rigid plastic partition dividing the front and rear seats. Through the rain-streaked window, intermittently illuminated by the relentless, blinding strobe of the emergency roof lights, I caught my own reflection in the glass. I was drenched. My wrists were bound in steel, and I was formally accused of a violent felony that carried a mandatory sentence of 10 to 15 years in a state penitentiary. Yet, as I sat there, I thought about the servers at Astrogrid. I thought about the encrypted telematics data, the biometric vehicle sensors, and the incredibly intricate, arrogant web of lies my family had just woven to destroy my life. They thought they had buried me. They did not realize they had just handed me the shovel. Slowly, involuntarily, I felt the corners of my mouth twitch. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. The young officer walked back around to the driver's side to report in. He glanced through the reinforced glass to check on his high-profile prisoner, fully expecting to see a broken woman crying in her hands or a drunken socialite screaming defiance. Instead, he saw that smile. He stopped dead in his tracks, the heavy rain pouring off the rigid brim of his uniform hat, his brow furrowed in sudden, deep unease. For the first time tonight, the righteous, burning anger in his eyes flickered. It was quickly replaced by a sudden, creeping sensation crawling up his spine, the unmistakable realization that something about this perfect arrest was terribly, terribly wrong. To understand how a family decides to feed one of their own to the state penitentiary, you have to understand the architecture of the Bishop household. We were not raised as a family. We were raised as a public relations campaign. My father, Martin Bishop, built his real estate empire in the Ravenport metropolitan area by paving over wetlands and crushing local zoning boards. He viewed every human interaction as a transaction. My mother, Elaine, was the ultimate Stonemere Hills socialite, a woman who treated her reputation like a fragile, priceless artifact for her. A bad rumor was a terminal illness. And then there was Sloane. Sloane was the golden child. She was a perfectly engineered product of their ambition. Blessed with our mother's striking features and our father's absolute lack of accountability, I was the anomaly. I moved out at 18, rejecting the country club memberships and the curated internships. Instead, I built a quiet, impenetrable life for myself at Astrogrid Mobility Risk Labs. I spent my days analyzing vehicle telematics, reconstructing crash physics from raw binary code, and mapping out supply chain risk models. To my parents, my career was an embarrassment. They told their friends I worked in tech support. They had no idea that my daily routine involved dissecting the exact kind of digital footprint my sister was currently trying to pin on me. The pattern had been established decades ago. Whenever Sloane created a disaster, Martin and Elaine functioned as a professional cleanup crew. When she wrapped a German sports car around an oak tree at 19, my father made a quiet donation to the Police Benevolent Association, and the accident report simply vanished. When she racked up $50,000 in illicit gambling debts at 22, my mother liquidated a stock portfolio to settle the balance before the country club gossips could catch wind of it. Sloane never learned to brace for impact because she never actually hit the ground. But this situation with Grant Holloway was entirely different. This was not a minor embarrassment to be swept under a Persian rug. Grant was the heir to the Holloway logistics dynasty. Their upcoming wedding was less a romantic union and more a corporate merger disguised by white lace and expensive floral arrangements. We were talking about a consolidation of assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. There was a very specific, ironclad morality clause buried deep within the prenuptial and investment agreements. The Holloways were fiercely protective of their corporate image. If Sloane brought a criminal scandal to their doorstep, especially a violent felony involving innocent victims, the entire merger would collapse overnight. She would be left with nothing. So, they needed a scapegoat. They needed someone who could plausibly take the fall without completely destroying the family's core financial structure. The obvious question was why they chose me, the estranged daughter who barely spoke to them. The answer lay in a legal document signed 5 years ago. When my maternal grandmother passed away, she did the one thing my parents never forgave her for. She bypassed Elaine entirely and made me the co-trustee of a highly lucrative, generation-skipping trust fund. I held a 30% voting block on decisions regarding the family's most liquid assets. I could not touch the principal, but I had the power to veto my father's attempts to leverage that money for his risky commercial developments. To Martin and Elaine, I was not a daughter. I was a hostile hostage holder. I was a difficult, uncooperative asset that they could not legally dissolve. Framing me for Sloane's crime was a masterpiece of ruthless efficiency. It protected the Holloway merger, and it conveniently removed the primary obstacle to their trust fund. A convicted felon serving a decade behind bars would easily be stripped of her fiduciary duties by any probate judge in the state of Colorado. After that insufferable dinner 3 days ago, I had returned to my apartment completely unaware that the trap had already been set. I had been working a grueling 48-hour sprint on a massive predictive risk model for Astrogrid. I barely slept. I lived on black coffee and protein bars, my eyes glued to scrolling streams of hexadecimal data. I had no reason to open my secondary clutch. I had no reason to realize I was driving around with only a digital copy of my identification on my phone, while the physical card rested in my sister's manicured hands, waiting to be planted at a crime scene. The beautiful poetic irony of their plan was their fundamental ignorance of how modern life is recorded. They lived in a world where money could erase paper trails and silence human witnesses. They thought a piece of plastic with my face on it, tossed onto the floorboard of an abandoned vehicle, was a definitive conviction. They did not know about the night of the crash, earlier this evening, long before the police sirens shattered the quiet of the highway. My body had finally given out. The exhaustion of the project had hit me like a physical blow. At exactly 9:15, I had collapsed onto my living room sofa. I did not even make it to my bedroom. I just fell face forward into the cushions and let the darkness take me. I was entirely alone in my apartment. I had no human alibi. Nobody saw me sleeping. But my smartwatch, still strapped to my wrist, had been recording the whole time. It captured the drop in my heart rate and a clear sleep window starting shortly after 9:15. It also logged a continuous connection to my home Wi-Fi while my phone remained stationary inside my apartment. While my sister was out in the rain making decisions that would tear two families apart, my devices were creating a time-stamped digital record that put me at home, not behind the wheel. My family had built a perfect, old-fashioned frame job, but they were about to go to war against the architect of a digital fortress. The air in Interrogation Room 2 tasted like oxidized metal and stale bleach. The walls were painted a suffocating shade of institutional gray, designed specifically to strip away a suspect's sense of time and comfort. I sat on a rigid metal chair bolted directly to the concrete floor, my hands resting flat on the scratched surface of the table. The heavy steel door swung open, sucking the dead air out of the room. Detective Lena Torres walked in. She did not swagger, nor did she posture. She moved with the brutal, efficient grace of a veteran investigator who had spent her entire career dismantling the lies of desperate people. She dropped a thick manila folder onto the table. The sharp slap of the cardboard echoed like a gavel. Torres pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down. Folding her hands over the file, she had dark, assessing eyes that immediately categorized me. To her, I was not a senior data analyst. I was just another entitled resident of the wealthy suburbs who thought money could absorb the impact of a horrific decision. "I am going to make this very simple," Torres began, her voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded absolute attention. "I have a holy trinity of evidence sitting right here in this folder. Item 1. We found your physical driver's license wedged against the floor mat of the driver's side of the abandoned vehicle. Item 2. We received an anonymous emergency dispatch call exactly 4 minutes after the collision. The caller provided a flawless physical description of you fleeing the scene on foot, right down to the specific charcoal wool coat you were wearing earlier this evening. Item 3. The vehicle belongs to a direct affiliate of your immediate family. The registration connects the dots in a perfectly straight line." She leaned forward, invading my physical space, letting the weight of the accusations settle over me. "This was not a fender bender. You hit a commercial delivery van. There were 2 adults inside. The passenger sustained a shattered collarbone. The driver is currently on an operating table undergoing a 6-hour spinal fusion because of the sheer velocity of the impact. If you take ownership of this right now, the district attorney might look favorably on your cooperation. If you force us to hunt down the surveillance footage and run the forensics, they will bury you under the maximum penalty." I maintained steady eye contact. I did not break my posture. I did not offer a tearful apology. Nor did I immediately scream the name of the person I knew was actually responsible. I knew that throwing wild accusations without proof would instantly classify me as a hostile, unreliable narrator. "This story is too neat," I said, keeping my vocal register low and perfectly flat. "Therefore, it is wrong." Torres narrowed her eyes, a muscle feathering along her jawline. She was accustomed to panic. She was accustomed to arrogant indignation. She was not accustomed to analytical detachment. "I want to see the plastic bin containing my confiscated personal effects," I continued, projecting total calm. "And I am formally invoking my right to counsel. However, I do not want a public defender. I want you to dial the emergency hotline for the corporate legal department at Grid Mobility Risk Labs. I require our on-call attorney to be present on speakerphone to observe the chain of custody for what I am about to show you." Torres studied me for 10 long seconds. She was calculating the risk. Finally, she stood up, walked to the door, and signaled a uniformed officer. 5 minutes later, my clear plastic property bin was placed on the table, and a groggy but sharply alert corporate attorney was patched through the room's landline speaker. "Counsel is present," the attorney announced through the static. "State your intent." "Detective Torres," I said, looking directly at the investigator, "with your explicit permission and under the visual observation of the camera in the corner of this room, I am going to reach into my bin. I am going to unlock my personal smartphone. I will place it flat on the table. I will not open any messaging applications. I am only going to open my native health tracking software and my home network diagnostic logs." Torres gave a curt, suspicious nod. "Do it slowly." I retrieved my phone. My fingers were slightly stiff from the freezing rain, but I smoothly authenticated the biometric scan. I placed the glowing screen in the center of the scratched metal table, rotating it so Torres had the optimal viewing angle. I opened the application synced to the smartwatch that was still strapped to my wrist. "The collision occurred at exactly 10:45 this evening," I stated, tapping the screen to isolate the timeline. "Look at the physiological data. From 9:15 until the moment your officers pounded on my apartment door, my heart rate was resting at a steady 52 beats per minute. I was in the 4th stage of a deep delta wave sleep cycle. You can see the continuous biometric stream." I swiped the screen, opening the application that controlled my smart home infrastructure. "Now look at the wireless local area network logs. At 10:45, my phone and my watch were statically connected to my bedroom router. There was 0 geolocation deviation. Finally, look at the encrypted registry for my front door deadbolt. The lock engaged at 8:30 this evening when I returned from work. It did not disengage a single time until I opened it for your arresting officers." Torres stared at the cascading lines of data. I could see the rigid certainty in her posture begin to fracture. She was a pragmatic investigator. She knew that faking a unified, multi-platform digital footprint across encrypted health sensors and independent home servers required a level of sophisticated premeditation that completely contradicted the chaotic nature of a hit-and-run accident. But Torres was not a rookie. She immediately identified the logical gap in my defense. "This is a compelling digital alibi," Torres conceded, her tone losing its aggressive edge but maintaining its sharp skepticism. "It strongly suggests your physical body was inside your apartment, but data can be manipulated. Phones can be left on nightstands while people slip out through fire escapes. More importantly, this does not answer the fundamental questions. If you were asleep, who placed your physical license on the floorboard of that SUV? And who made the anonymous phone call perfectly describing your jacket?" She tapped a pen against the manila folder. "This alibi proves you might not have been behind the wheel. It does not prove you are the victim of a conspiracy." I looked at the closed folder, then back to her dark, assessing eyes. The power dynamic in the room had finally shifted. I was no longer a suspect pleading for mercy. I was an expert stepping into my domain. "Then do not close the file too early, Detective," I replied, my voice dropping to a cold, razor-sharp whisper. "You are sitting across from someone who understands how modern cars tell the truth better than their drivers do." Torres leaned back, her chair scraping harshly against the concrete floor. The heavy skepticism in her posture was suddenly replaced by a sharp, calculating focus. I had her attention, but now I needed to give her the architectural blueprints of my sister's disaster. My employer, Grid Mobility Risk Labs, holds the exclusive commercial data contract for the entire Holloway Logistics fleet, I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional. That includes the personal corporate vehicles assigned to executive family members. Grant Holloway drives a heavily modified, top-tier luxury sport utility vehicle. It is basically a rolling server rack. Under standard emergency law enforcement protocols, I have authorization to access the back-end telematics interface, but you need to act right now. Torres frowned, her dark eyes narrowing. Why the sudden rush? Because the Holloways employ a ruthlessly efficient private crisis management team, I replied. The moment they realize a catastrophic injury collision involves one of their flagship vehicles, someone in their information technology department will initiate a remote wipe of the onboard crash telemetry to limit their civil liability. You need to call your night duty prosecutor and secure an emergency data preservation order within the next 10 minutes. Freeze the servers before they realize we are looking. Torres did not hesitate for a single second. She pulled her shoulder radio, ordered a uniform to bring her a secure terminal laptop, and stepped out into the hallway to make the urgent call. When she returned 15 minutes later, she had the district attorney on speakerphone and an active preservation warrant digitally signed. I guided her through the login gateway, bypassing the consumer-facing applications and diving straight into the raw hexadecimal streams of the vehicle's event data recorder. Let us look at the precise moment of impact, I said, pointing at the cascading lines of data illuminating the laptop screen. A normal driver reacting to an unexpected obstacle will instinctually slam on the brakes. Look at the brake pressure sensors at the exact millisecond of the collision. It registers absolute zero. Now look at the electronic throttle control. It is open at 85%. The driver was actively accelerating through the point of impact. That is not distracted driving. That is a pure, alcohol-fueled panic response. Torres leaned in much closer, tracing the data columns with the plastic tip of her pen. Now, let us identify the actual operator, I continued, pulling up the digital driver profile logs. Modern luxury vehicles do not just unlock, they recognize the specific radio frequency of the key fob and adjust the cabin accordingly. The vehicle was unlocked using secondary fob number 2. Look at the profile history. Until 2 weeks ago, this exact fob was registered under the name Sloan. It was recently changed to a randomized alphanumeric string, likely an attempt by Grant to clean up his digital footprint before the wedding. But the hardware identification address remains entirely identical. I opened another window, translating the ergonomic sensor data into a visual wireframe representation of the cabin. Look at the interior configuration triggered by that specific fob, I instructed. The driver's seat weight sensor recorded a mass of 115 pounds. I weigh 135 pounds. The steering column was electronically telescoped outward by 3 inches, and the seat was elevated by 2 inches. I am 5 feet 9 inches tall. My sister is 5 feet 4. This physical configuration matches her exact biometric profile. If I had been driving that car tonight, my knees would have been brutally crushed against the dashboard. Torres was furiously taking notes on her legal pad, her previous hostility having entirely evaporated. We were no longer cops and suspect. We were 2 analysts dismantling a complex crime scene. There is one more crucial cabin detail, I said, pulling the internal audio warning logs. Look at the sequence right before the vehicle shifted into drive. The unbuckled seatbelt warning chime activated 14 consecutive times. The transmission sensor shows the car shifting from park to neutral, then back to park, then finally into drive, all while the chime is screaming. My sister insists on wearing 4-inch stiletto heels to every evening event. She cannot feel the pedals properly, and she always struggles to engage the heavy column shifter in Grant's oversized vehicle. Torres picked up her tactical tablet and pulled up a traffic camera image her team had just secured from an intersection 2 miles from the crash site. She slid the glowing screen across the table toward me. The visual resolution is garbage because of the heavy rain, Torres admitted, pointing to the blurred, pixelated image of the sport utility vehicle blowing through a yellow light. We cannot pull a definitive facial recognition match from the driver's seat, but look at the directional vector. The vehicle is heading northbound on Route 109. That highway does not lead to your downtown apartment. That route goes directly up the mountain, straight toward the gated entrance of the Stonemere Hills Estates. She sat back, lacing her fingers together and resting them on her chin. The atmosphere in the interrogation room had fundamentally shifted. The oppressive weight of the false narrative was lifting, replaced by the cold, undeniable truth of the raw data points. "All right, Bishop," Torres said, her voice dropping to a low, respectful murmur. "You just proved to me that your physical body was not behind the wheel. The telematics, the weight sensors, the routing vector all point directly to your younger sister. A competent defense attorney would have an absolute field day with this in court. You are essentially cleared of the physical hit and run." She paused, letting the heavy silence hang between us for a long moment. "But," Torres continued, "proving your sister drove the car does not prove your family orchestrated a criminal conspiracy to frame you. It does not prove who planted your physical license on that floorboard, and it absolutely does not prove who made that anonymous false report to our dispatch center. Right now, your sister can easily claim she panicked, fled, and dropped your license by accident because she borrowed your jacket, without direct evidence of witness tampering and filing a false police report. I cannot touch your parents or the Holloway kid. This just becomes another rich girl getting a slap on the wrist for a reckless driving misdemeanor." She expected me to nod. She expected me to demand my immediate release, call a taxi, go back to my apartment, and let the corporate lawyers handle the rest of the messy fallout. Instead, I placed my hands flat on the scratched metal table and looked her dead in the eye. "I do not want to go home, Detective," I said quietly, the cold anger finally bleeding into my voice. "If we stop right now, my father will just hire a dozen crisis managers to muddy the waters and blame a software glitch. I do not want to just clear my name. I want to burn their entire safety net to the ground. I want you to keep me in custody on paper. Keep the arrest record active in your system. Let my family believe their brilliant plan worked perfectly." Torres raised an eyebrow, a genuine spark of respect igniting in her dark eyes. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "I am asking you to let me help you reconstruct the exact script they used to put me in this chair," I replied, a chilling calmness settling over me. "Let me go back into their world. Let me be the bait." Torres crossed her arms, the harsh fluorescent light casting deep shadows across her face. We were no longer looking at a simple traffic collision. We were staring at the blueprint of a multi-million-dollar corporate fraud scheme masquerading as a tragic family misunderstanding. "Open a new browser tab," I instructed, my fingers hovering over the laptop keyboard we had just used to dissect the vehicle telemetry. "Navigate to the Public Financial Registry for the state of Colorado. Search for Bishop Holdings and Holloway Logistics." Torres typed the commands. A cascade of recent corporate filings filled the screen. "My sister's wedding is not a celebration of love," I explained, scanning the densely worded legal documents. "It is a highly publicized ribbon-cutting ceremony for a massive joint venture. Look at this schedule of assets. My father has been aggressively acquiring cheap, unzoned land along the interstate corridor for the past 18 months. Grant Holloway's family needs exactly that type of real estate to build out their next-generation automated distribution hubs. They are merging their assets to create a logistics empire worth at least $85 million. The final contracts are scheduled to be executed this Friday, exactly 4 days from now." I pointed to a specific paragraph buried deep within the investor disclosures. "There is the kill switch. The institutional backers financing this merger demanded a strict reputation and morality clause, if any key stakeholder, which now includes my sister as Grant's future wife and a newly appointed board member, is indicted for a severe criminal offense. The banks have the unilateral right to withdraw their capital immediately. A driving under the influence charge coupled with a felony hit and run would absolutely detonate the entire $85 million deal before the ink could even dry." Torres leaned forward, the pieces locking into place in her mind. "So your father does not need to protect Sloan forever. He only needs to buy enough time to get past the closing bell on Friday. Once the funds are transferred and locked into the new corporate entities, the banks cannot easily pull out. He just needed a temporary scapegoat to absorb the police attention for a few days. Exactly, I said. And the anonymous phone call was the catalyst they used to force your hand. Torres tapped her pen against her chin, her eyes narrowing as she recalled the dispatch report. She pulled a digital audio file from her secure police server and hit play. A heavily muffled, frantic female voice filled the interrogation room, describing a woman fleeing the scene of the crash. "Listen closely to the specific details," Torres murmured. The voice on the recording gasped for air, sounding artificially panicked. "She ran toward the alley. She was wearing a charcoal gray wool coat. It had this distinct, asymmetrical collar. Dark slacks, leather shoes." Torres paused the playback. That collar gave us an incredibly precise clothing description for a dark, rainy night from 50 feet away. "It is precise because it is entirely fabricated from memory," I replied, a wave of profound disgust washing over me. "I was wearing that exact charcoal wool coat with the asymmetrical collar 3 nights ago at our family dinner. It is a designer piece. It is very memorable, but I did not wear it to work today. I left it hanging in my front closet. When your officers arrested me tonight, I was wearing a standard black trench coat. The person on that recording did not see a woman running from a wrecked vehicle. They saw me at a restaurant 72 hours ago and read my outfit from a prepared script." I paused, letting the silence emphasize the betrayal. "That voice belongs to my mother. She used a burner phone to ensure you would rush to my apartment and arrest me before I had any opportunity to gather my own digital alibi." Torres exhaled a long, heavy breath, realizing the sheer audacity of the Bishop family's manipulation. But as I stared at the vehicle diagnostics still running in the background of the laptop, a new, far more disturbing anomaly caught my attention. The conspiracy was not contained to my parents' living room. It had infected the Holloway empire as well. "Detective, we need to look closer at the owner of that sport utility vehicle," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Grant Holloway is not just a victim of my sister's reckless driving. He is an active participant in the cover-up." I maximized the technical dashboard for the SUV's advanced driver assistance systems. Modern luxury vehicles are equipped with mandatory automatic emergency braking and pre-collision throttle override, I explained, highlighting a specific string of red text in the system log. If the radar detects an imminent high-speed impact, the computer takes control away from the driver. It forces the brakes to engage, but as we saw earlier, my sister accelerated straight through the commercial van. The computer never intervened. I pointed to the timestamp on the error code. The emergency braking system did not fail tonight. It was manually disabled using a master administrative override exactly 14 days ago. Furthermore, look at the active global positioning system polling data from the minutes immediately following the crash. The vehicle was abandoned, but the onboard diagnostics show the engine was turned off, and then a secondary Holloway corporate fleet vehicle pinged its location less than 2 blocks away within 8 minutes. Torres stood up. Pacing the short length of the interrogation room, the stakes had just multiplied exponentially. "Your sister panicked and called Grant," Torres deduced, her voice sharp with adrenaline. "He used his own logistics network to dispatch a cleanup vehicle. He extracted her from the perimeter before our first responders even arrived. He manipulated the car's safety features weeks ago, likely because he drives recklessly himself. And tonight, he actively tampered with a major crime scene to protect his own massive financial merger." This was no longer just a toxic family dynamic. This was a synchronized, multi-party criminal enterprise. My parents had orchestrated the legal framing and the false witness reports to serve me up to the police. Grant Holloway had managed the physical extraction and the digital manipulation of the vehicle to ensure his fiancée vanished without a trace. They had built a perfect, interlocking wall of plausible deniability, completely confident that I would quietly take the fall to protect the family name. Torres stopped pacing. She turned to face me, planting her hands firmly on the edge of the metal table. The pragmatic, hard-nosed detective had completely vanished, replaced by a woman staring at a massive, career-defining web of corruption. She had all the technical data she needed to clear my name. She had enough circumstantial evidence to bring them all in for questioning. But questioning was not a conviction, and an early arrest would only trigger a swarm of high-priced corporate defense attorneys who would spend the next 5 years burying the truth under endless legal motions. Torres looked deep into my eyes, presenting me with the ultimate tactical choice. "I have enough right here to rip up your arrest warrant and walk you out the front door," Torres said evenly. "I can send units to pick up your parents, your sister, and the Holloway heir before the sun comes up, but you know exactly how that plays out. They will lawyer up, shut their mouths, and blame rogue employees or system glitches. So I need to know your endgame right now. Bishop, do you want me to arrest them tonight with what we currently have? Or are you aiming for something much bigger than a standard arrest warrant?" I looked at Detective Torres, evaluating the immense weight of her offer. The prospect of an immediate arrest was undeniably intoxicating. The image of heavy patrol cars breaching the immaculate iron gates of the Stonemere Hills estate in the dead of night, dragging my parents and my sister out into the freezing rain, offered a sharp, visceral thrill. But I understood the architecture of wealth and consequence better than anyone. I knew exactly how my father constructed his firewalls. "If you arrest Martin Bishop tonight based on telematics and circumstantial routing data," I stated, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion, "he will have a strike team of defense attorneys billing $2,000 an hour standing in your lobby before sunrise. They will immediately execute a strategy of compartmentalization. They will argue my sister panicked in a vacuum and that my parents knew absolutely nothing. They will hire independent analysts to claim the vehicle network was vulnerable to a remote cyber attack. They will drag this department into a procedural quagmire for the next 5 years until the district attorney loses the political will to prosecute and the victims are forced into a quiet, heavily non-disclosure-bound financial settlement." Torres crossed her arms, the leather of her holster creaking softly in the quiet room. The prosecutor on the speakerphone remained silent, listening intently to the strategic assessment. "We cannot just clear my name," I continued, leaning closer to the metal table. "We need them to build their own gallows. We need them to actively collude, on the record, while they firmly believe their master plan is succeeding. I want to gather undeniable audio evidence of them coercing me into a fabricated confession. I want you to capture them orchestrating the cover story." "Absolutely not," Torres countered immediately, her protective instincts flaring. "You are a civilian. You are emotionally compromised. Sending you back into a hostile environment to act as an undercover operative is an astronomical liability. If they suspect for 1 second that you are wearing a wire, the situation could turn violent." "This is not a domestic dispute, Detective," I fired back, my tone hardening into cold steel. "Look at the legal definitions of what we have uncovered in the last hour. We are looking at a coordinated criminal conspiracy. We are looking at aggressive witness tampering. We are looking at the foundational steps of a multi-million-dollar corporate insurance fraud. You have the puppet right now. But you need the puppet masters. I am the only person who can walk into that house and make them freely admit to pulling the strings." The heavy silence stretched across the interrogation room. Torres looked at the digital log still glowing on the laptop screen, then down at my hands, which remained perfectly steady. She pressed the mute button on the phone console, conferring silently with the unseen prosecutor for 2 agonizing minutes. When she unmuted the line, her posture had fundamentally changed. "Stand up," Torres ordered. I stood. She walked around the table, pulled a small metal key from her belt, and unlocked the heavy steel handcuffs. The brutal pressure vanished, leaving deep red indentations ringing my wrists. I rubbed my skin, feeling the blood rush back into my hands. I was no longer formally classified as the prime suspect in a violent felony. I had just become a confidential cooperating witness. "We keep the original arrest warrant active in the system," Torres instructed, her voice dropping to a low, tactical cadence. "As far as the Ravenport Police Dispatch is concerned, You are currently sitting in a holding cell awaiting arraignment. We maintain total radio silence regarding the telematics breakthrough. We let the Bishop family believe they are winning." She slid a sleek, black smartphone across the table. It was strictly a burner device, configured entirely for law enforcement surveillance. "Make the call," she said. I picked up the device, my mind rapidly constructing the necessary psychological profile. I needed to sound exactly like the person they expected me to be: broken, terrified, and desperate for the safety of the family name. I dialed my mother's private number. The line rang twice before the connection clicked open. "Hello?" Elaine answered. Her voice was not thick with sleep. She was wide awake, waiting for the inevitable confirmation of her handiwork. "Mom!" I breathed into the receiver, forcing a jagged, hyperventilating tremor into my vocal cords. "Mom, I am at the precinct. They arrested me. They have my license from the crash. They are talking about an indictment before morning." Elaine did not gasp. She did not ask if I was hurt. She transitioned instantly into the role of a seasoned crisis manager. "Listen to me very carefully. Camila," Elaine commanded, her tone dropping into a chillingly calm, authoritative register. "Do not say another word to anyone in that building. Do not call the public defender. Do not invoke your corporate counsel. You will tell them you are exhausted and you are invoking your right to remain silent until your family secures private representation. Do you understand me?" "I am terrified," I choked out, squeezing my eyes shut to manufacture a convincing sob. "I need help. I need you to help me." There was a brief rustling on the other end of the line. The phone was being passed. "Camilla, it is your father." Martin's voice boomed through the tiny speaker, heavy with artificial paternal comfort and absolute, domineering control. "Stay completely quiet. I am dispatching a bail bondsman and our primary fixer right now. You just come straight home the moment they process your release. We will take care of everything." "We will take care of everything." It was the exact phrase he had used when Sloan wrecked the sports car. It was the exact phrase he used when he needed someone to quietly absorb a catastrophic loss. To the police listening on the wire, it sounded like a supportive father. To me, it was a death sentence. "Okay," I whispered, letting the line go dead. I looked up at Torres. The trap was successfully primed. My family believed I had swallowed the hook, line, and sinker. They believed I was coming home to seek their protection, completely unaware that I was bringing the full, devastating weight of the justice system right to their front door. The next meeting would take place within the opulent, suffocating walls of the Stonemere Hills mansion. I was going to walk into their fortress. I was going to sit at their mahogany table. But I was no longer the sacrificial lamb. I was the bait, and the hunters were right behind me. The iron gates of the Stonemere Hills estate parted in absolute silence. It was nearing 3 o'clock in the morning. The rain had intensified, but I barely felt the cold. Beneath my still damp silk blouse, an ultra-thin digital transmitter was taped tightly against my ribs, continuously broadcasting a highly encrypted audio feed directly to Detective Torres and her surveillance unit parked 3 blocks away in an unmarked utility van. I stepped out of the rideshare vehicle, deliberately forcing my shoulders to slump. I let my hands tremble. I needed to embody the absolute physical and emotional collapse of a woman whose life had just been violently derailed. When the heavy mahogany front door swung open, I did not find a weeping mother waiting to embrace her traumatized child. Elaine stood in the grand foyer, her posture rigid, her eyes conducting a rapid clinical assessment of my physical state. She wore a pristine cashmere wrap, looking entirely out of place for a mother whose daughter had just been released from a police holding cell. "Come into the study," she commanded, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not ask how they treated me. She simply grabbed my elbow and steered me toward the back of the sprawling house. The air inside my father's private study felt suffocating, thick with the scent of aged leather and unyielding ambition. Martin Bishop was seated behind his massive walnut desk, looking exactly like a man managing a hostile corporate takeover rather than a family crisis. He gestured for me to sit on the low leather sofa opposite him. I sank into the cushions, pulling my knees tight together, letting my hands shake visibly in my lap. "I am so scared," I whispered, pitching my voice an octave higher to mimic raw panic. "They read me my rights. They put me in a cage. I do not know what to do." Elaine immediately stepped into her role as the crisis coordinator. She sat beside me, placing a cold hand over mine. "Listen to me, Camila. You have experienced a severe trauma. The mind does terrible things under that kind of stress. You need to remember that you were confused. You were completely overwhelmed by the rain and the noise. You panicked, and your memory of the event is entirely fragmented. You cannot recall the specific details because you were in a state of sheer shock. Do you understand? That is the absolute truth we are working with." She was feeding me the exact legal defense they had pre-selected. It was a beautiful, terrifying performance, and every single syllable was being captured by the wire against my chest. Martin leaned forward, sliding a crisp, white document across the polished surface of his desk. "Our legal team drafted this preliminary statement an hour ago," my father stated, tapping a heavy gold pen against the paper. "It is a soft declaration. It acknowledges your presence at the scene, but heavily emphasizes your psychological distress and disorientation. Signing this tonight gives our lawyers the leverage they need to approach the district attorney first thing tomorrow morning and negotiate a quiet, favorable plea arrangement before the grand jury convenes. We take control of the narrative right now." I stared at the document. It was a confession disguised as a plea for psychiatric mercy. Before I could formulate a response, the heavy oak doors of the study burst open. Sloane stumbled into the room. Her eyes were rimmed with angry red, and her expensive makeup was slightly smudged, but the frantic energy radiating from her was not born of remorse for the two people currently lying in hospital beds. It was the raw, unadulterated terror of a woman watching her $85 million merger slowly circle the drain. "Is it done?" Sloane demanded, her voice shrill and accusatory, completely ignoring my disheveled state. She glared at our father. "Did she sign it? Grant's parents are calling my phone every 20 minutes. They are threatening to halt the escrow transfer. We need a definitive press release by sunrise." I looked at my younger sister, letting a perfectly calibrated look of confusion wash over my face. I needed to escalate the tension. I needed them off balance. "I do not understand," I said, my voice wavering perfectly. "If I was driving, and I ran away, what happened to the car? Where is Grant's sport utility vehicle right now?" The temperature in the study plummeted instantly. All three of them froze. It was not a casual pause. It was a sudden, violent cessation of movement, as if all the oxygen had been vacuumed out of the room. Martin's hand tightened imperceptibly around his gold pen. Sloane's breath hitched in her throat, her eyes darting frantically toward our mother. That single half-second of terrified silence was a more damning admission of guilt than any signed confession. Elaine, always the first to try and seal a breach, scrambled to patch the hole in their story. "The police have it, obviously," Elaine stammered, her usually flawless composure showing a hairline fracture. "They impounded it after they responded to the emergency call. Thank God that anonymous witness dialed 911 when they did. The dispatcher log said the call was only 47 seconds long, but it was enough to get the paramedics there." I kept my expression entirely blank, but internally, a surge of adrenaline rushed through my veins. She had just handed me the executioner's axe. 47 seconds? I repeated softly, looking directly into my mother's eyes. "How could you possibly know the exact duration of the emergency call? I never told you that. The police never told me that." Elaine's face drained of all color. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She realized instantly that she had just quoted a detail that only the person who made the fabricated call could possibly know. "Shut your mouth, Elaine!" Martin roared. slamming his fist onto the walnut desk with enough force to rattle the expensive crystal decanter sitting on the edge. The mask of the calm, calculating patriarch shattered completely. His face flushed dark red with sudden, violent fury. He stood up, towering over the desk, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You will stop asking questions," my father snarled, his voice stripped of all paternal pretense, revealing the ruthless corporate predator beneath. "You are going to take this pen. You are going to sign the bottom of this page. You are going to do exactly what this family requires of you tonight before the morning news cycle gets a whiff of this disaster. I will not let you destroy this merger with your endless, selfish insubordination." He shoved the document closer to the edge of the desk, the heavy gold pen rolling to a stop right in front of me. I leaned forward slowly, extending my trembling hand as if to surrender, but my eyes bypassed the confession entirely. Resting just beneath the edge of his leather desk blotter was another document. It was partially obscured, but the bold, red logo at the top was unmistakable. It was a fast-tracked commercial claim form from Century Guardian Insurance, the primary underwriter for the Holloway logistics fleet. They were not just framing me to save the wedding and the corporate merger, they were actively preparing to file a massive, fraudulent property damage and liability claim against their own insurance network, using my fabricated confession as the foundational evidence. The trap was not just for me. It was a multi-tiered financial crime, and they had just laid out all the blueprints while the police recorded every single word. The extraction of the audio files took less than 10 minutes in the back of the surveillance van. Torres and the night duty prosecutor listened to the playback in profound silence. They heard my father completely lose his temper. They heard my mother slip up about the exact length of the 47-second emergency dispatch call. They heard the desperate, frantic scramble of a family actively constructing a wall of perjury. "This is spectacular," the prosecutor's voice crackled over the van's encrypted speakerphone. "We have the bishops dead to rights on witness tampering and conspiracy to commit fraud, but we are missing the crucial anchor. If we want to detonate this $85 million merger and bring the Holloway family into the indictment, we need to prove Grant Holloway was not just a passive bystander whose vehicle was stolen by his panicked fiancée. We need a definitive digital or physical link proving he orchestrated the cover-up." I did not say a word. I simply pulled the rugged tactical laptop onto my lap and reopened the secure portal to the Astergrid mobility servers. The answer was always buried in the code. "Look at the administrative logs for the disabled pre-collision braking system," I told Torres, highlighting a specific string of back-end commands. "A driver cannot permanently disable that safety feature from the dashboard interface. It resets every time the ignition cycles. To kill the system entirely, someone had to access the root directory using a dedicated diagnostic tool, and they did. The system was flashed and overwritten exactly 14 days ago." I cross-referenced the network gateway logs. The command was not sent over a cellular connection. It came through a wired local network registered to the private garage at the Holloway estate. The diagnostic session was authenticated with credentials assigned to Grant Holloway's admin profile. That does not look like panic after the crash. It looks like premeditation 2 weeks before Torres could process the implication of the premeditated tampering. Her secondary department phone vibrated. She answered, her face remaining rigidly neutral as she listened to a frantic voice on the other end. When she hung up, a predatory smile touched the corners of her mouth. "That was an anonymous tip from the senior event manager coordinating the wedding," Torres announced, pulling up a digital map of the downtown area. "She is terrified of being implicated as an accessory. She claims she saw Grant Holloway and your father having a highly aggressive, hushed argument in a secluded hallway of the venue right around the time of the collision. More importantly, she gave us the exact location of Grant's private parking bay at the logistics facility. Within 30 minutes, Torres had leveraged the anonymous tip to secure a preservation order for the venue's closed-circuit security cameras. The high-definition footage from the rear loading dock told a story that destroyed any remaining illusion of Grant's innocence, exactly 20 minutes after the impact on the highway. A sleek black corporate sedan pulled into the loading bay. Grant Holloway was behind the wheel. The rear door opened, and my sister stumbled out. She was soaked from the rain, shivering violently, and visibly hyperventilating. Grant did not look shocked. He looked annoyed. He grabbed a heavy canvas duffel bag from the trunk, grabbed Sloane by the upper arm, and aggressively marched her into a blind spot behind the catering tents. 15 minutes later, Sloane emerged wearing an entirely different outfit, a pristine silk dress and a trench coat that had never seen a drop of rain. Grant had not just picked her up. He was the architect of her vanishing act. He had orchestrated the extraction, managed the physical evidence, and likely instructed my mother on exactly what to say to the emergency dispatcher. My burner phone suddenly lit up the dark interior of the van. The caller identification displayed Elaine's private number. Torres hit the recording switch and nodded. I answered, pressing the phone to my ear. "Camila, darling," my mother began. The frantic crisis manager from the study was gone. In her place was a woman deploying emotional terrorism with the precision of a scalpel. She began to cry. Soft, manufactured sobs that sounded incredibly convincing. "We are just so worried about you. Your father and I have been talking. You have been working such long hours at that technology company. You seem so erratic lately, so confused about reality." She paused, letting the silence hang like a blade. "If you do not sign that statement by noon tomorrow," Elaine continued, her voice hardening into ice, "your father is going to make a few very painful phone calls to the board of directors at Astrogrid. We will tell them you are suffering a severe psychological breakdown. We will tell them you are a liability. We will have you medically evaluated. Camila, we will make sure you never work in data analytics again. Do the right thing for your family. Protect your sister." She terminated the call, instead of feeling the familiar suffocating weight of my family's control. I felt absolute clarity. They were attempting to destroy my professional reputation to build their alibi. I immediately dialed the emergency contact for Astrogrid's legal department. Within 5 minutes, our senior corporate counsel was actively compiling my flawless quarterly performance reviews, my recent psychiatric clearance for handling classified logistics data, and drafting a preemptive cease and desist order regarding any defamatory medical claims. My career was bulletproof. Elaine's threat was completely neutralized before she even hung up the phone. Torres leaned back against the metal wall of the van, tapping the screen of her tablet. "I have enough evidence to secure a conditional emergency search warrant for both estates right now. We have the data, the footage, and the audio. Do not execute it yet," I said, my voice steady and cold. "If you raid them now, they will claim they panicked and made a series of poor, isolated decisions. We need them to sit in a room together and actively confirm the final version of the lie. We need them to synchronize their perjury." Right on cue, the burner phone vibrated with an incoming text message. It was from Sloane. The message was short, devoid of any sisterly affection, and dripped with entitlement. "You have to be at the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. Grant's investors are getting suspicious about the rumors. You need to smile, hold a glass of champagne, and prove to everyone that this family is perfectly united. Do not ruin my life." I looked up from the glowing screen, locking eyes with the detective. We had our stage. The rehearsal dinner was no longer a celebration. It was going to be an ambush. The ballroom of the Grand Azure Hotel in downtown Ravenport was a masterclass in opulent deception. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, forgiving light over the rehearsal dinner, illuminating the faces of the city's elite and the Holloway logistics executives. I stood near the towering champagne pyramid, holding a delicate crystal flute, playing the exact role my family demanded. I was the prodigal sister, freshly cleared of a tragic misunderstanding, standing as a pillar of family unity. But the room was not just filled with wealthy investors and socialites. The bartender pouring top-shelf bourbon was an undercover narcotics detective. The tall, broad-shouldered man checking invitations at the Velvet Rope was a senior tactical officer. Even the woman adjusting the floral centerpieces was a digital forensics expert. Detective Torres had wired the entire venue. We were executing a live-action stage play, and my family had no idea they were the lead actors in their own tragedy. The charade reached its peak when my father clinked a silver spoon against his glass. Martin Bishop commanded the room, a charming, predatory smile plastered across his face. He spoke eloquently about the merging of two great dynasties, then turned his gaze toward me. He demanded I join him at the microphone to offer a toast. It was a calculated legal maneuver. If I stood before 80 of their most important financial backers and praised the family, my father could later use the video evidence to prove I was mentally stable and deeply integrated into the family structure, directly contradicting any future claims of coercion. I walked to the front, my heart beating a steady rhythm against the wire taped to my ribs. I smiled at the crowd. I raised my glass. I delivered a flawless 2-minute speech about the enduring, unbreakable bonds of the Bishop family. The investors clapped politely, completely oblivious to the venom hidden beneath every syllable. Martin beamed, wrapping a heavy arm around my shoulders, securing the digital alibi he thought he needed. 10 minutes later, Elaine materialized at my side. She linked her arm through mine, her manicured nails digging sharply into my skin, and steered me away from the crowd toward a private bridal suite down the hall. Once the heavy mahogany door clicked shut, the doting mother vanished. Elaine reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick, unmarked manila envelope. She shoved it into my hands. It was heavy with banded cash. "There is $50,000 in unmarked bills right there," my mother stated, her voice dropping to a harsh, transactional whisper. "Take a vacation. Go to Europe. Just disappear for a few weeks until everything is finalized with the police and the merger is locked. When the dust settles, your father and I will authorize the immediate release of your 30% share of the grandmother's trust fund. You will never have to work another day in your life. Camila, just keep your mouth shut and let us handle the narrative." I looked at the envelope, then at the woman who brought me into the world. She was actively bribing a federal witness. I nodded slowly, playing the part of the bought and paid for scapegoat. While the tiny microphone recorded every devastating word of her felony offer, I slipped out of the suite, claiming I needed to use the restroom. But I intentionally bypassed the main corridor and navigated toward the dimly lit service hallways behind the kitchen. I needed to find Sloane. The pressure of the evening was bound to crack her fragile composure. I found them near the loading dock service elevator. Grant Holloway had my sister backed against a stack of empty catering crates. His face was twisted in sheer, uncontrolled rage. Sloane was sobbing, her hands shaking violently. "I just tried to help," Sloane cried, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I deleted the folder from your phone like you asked. I thought it was the right one." Grant slammed his palm against the metal doorframe. "You deleted the local directory. You absolute idiot. You did not disable the automated vendor synchronization protocol. The hotel valet system automatically backs up every single license plate and high-definition facial scan to a third-party cloud server the second a vehicle enters the VIP garage. We manage the highway cameras, but if the police subpoena the hotel's third-party vendor, they are going to see exactly what you were wearing when you stumbled out of my car, 20 minutes after the crash." I stopped breathing. The missing link. They had wiped their own devices and manipulated the city cameras, but they had completely forgotten about the automated data retention policies of private commercial vendors. I immediately turned around and walked briskly back into the ballroom. I spotted Torres disguised in a sharp black catering manager uniform. Adjusting a stack of linen napkins, I walked past her, barely moving my lips. "Third-party valet vendor," I whispered into the ambient noise of the party. "Grant's car, VIP parking garage at the venue from the night of the crash. Secure the automatic cloud backup right now." Torres did not even blink. She simply tapped her earpiece, turned on her heel, and vanished into the kitchen to dispatch her technical team. The digital noose was finally tightening around Grant Holloway's neck. As the evening wound down and the last of the investors filed out into the crisp night air, my father gathered our immediate family near the coat check. His eyes were bright with the arrogant triumph of a man who believed he had successfully outsmarted the world. "Tonight was flawless," Martin declared, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "We stabilized the investors. Tomorrow morning, at 9 o'clock sharp. We are hosting a private brunch at the Stonemere house, just the 5 of us, plus the family attorney. We are going to sit down, finalize the timeline, and get your signature on that formal statement. Camilla, once you sign the paper, this nightmare is officially over. It was the final trap. They were bringing the lawyer to force the confession. I nodded meekly, agreeing to the morning meeting. As my family walked out toward their waiting town car, I lingered near the exit. Torres stepped out from the shadows of the cloakroom. Her undercover uniform traded for her standard trench coat. Her dark eyes were burning with focused intensity. She had heard everything. Torres looked at me, her voice a low, gravelly whisper over the hum of the hotel lobby. Tomorrow is the final move. Either they spring their own trap at the breakfast table, or they smell the smoke and vanish. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Stonemere Hills dining room, illuminating a lavish breakfast spread that no one had touched. It was exactly 9 o'clock. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, playing the role of the defeated scapegoat one last time. Across from me sat Martin, Elaine, Sloane, Grant Holloway, and Arthur Penhaligon, the Bishop family's senior fixer and defense attorney. Arthur slid a thick, freshly printed legal document across the polished wood. "This is a voluntary statement of fault," he explained in a smooth, practiced monotone. "It admits you were driving, you panicked, and you fled. We have already negotiated with the district attorney's office. If you sign this right now, we can secure a minimum security facility and early parole." I looked down at the paper, letting my hands tremble violently. Beneath my silk blouse, the police wire was hot against my skin. "I just need to know," I whispered, forcing a tear to spill over my eyelashes. "If I sign this, everything just goes away, right? It is all completely handled?" Martin leaned back in his leather chair, swirling his black coffee. He could not resist the urge to gloat. "I handled the witness report myself. Camilla, I paid off the right people. And I scrubbed the narrative clean. We built an absolute firewall around your sister. The police bought the anonymous tip hook, line, and sinker. The only piece missing from this perfect defense is your signature on that line." I turned my gaze toward Grant. "And the car? They will not find anything tying Sloane to the sport utility vehicle?" Grant scoffed, rolling his eyes at my apparent ignorance. "I wiped the onboard administrative directory 2 weeks ago to disable the telemetry, and I personally drove Sloane away from the loading dock last night. I swapped her clothes and dumped the damaged vehicle where it looked like a simple joyride theft. It is basic damage control. You are worrying about absolutely nothing." He thought he was explaining corporate crisis management. In reality, he had just confessed to a half-dozen federal and state felonies directly into a live police microphone. Arthur uncapped a heavy gold fountain pen and placed it deliberately on top of the contract. "Sign it. Camilla, let us end this." I reached for the pen. My fingers hovered over the gold barrel. Then, the heavy brass doorbell echoed through the mansion. It was not a polite ring. It was a continuous, aggressive blare, followed immediately by the splintering crash of the front door being breached by a tactical ram. Heavy combat boots thundered across the Italian marble foyer. Before Martin could even push his chair back, the dining room was swarming with armed officers, state prosecutors, and Detective Torres. Torres walked straight to the head of the table, her badge glinting in the morning light. Martin Bishop, Elaine Bishop, Sloane Bishop, and Grant Holloway. Nobody move a single muscle. Arthur jumped up, his face flushed with indignation. "This is an illegal intrusion. I am their legal counsel, and I demand to see a warrant immediately." Torres calmly slapped a thick stack of warrants onto the mahogany table, right on top of my fabricated confession. "I have warrants for the entire estate, counselor, and we do not need a confession anymore." She turned her piercing gaze to my family, who were frozen in varying states of absolute shock. "We have the complete digital alibi proving Camilla was asleep in her apartment. We have the decrypted telematics proving Sloane was driving the vehicle. We have the backup security footage from the hotel valet proving Grant orchestrated the physical extraction. And best of all, We have the last 48 hours of your private family conversations recorded in pristine high definition, including the synchronized perjury you all just confessed to exactly 3 minutes ago." Torres pressed a button on her tactical radio. The clear, undeniable audio of Sloane crying about her $85 million merger over the lives of the victims filled the dining room. Sloane collapsed forward, burying her face in her hands, a jagged, hysterical scream tearing from her throat. Her perfect wedding, her wealth, and her freedom evaporated in a single breath. Elaine scrambled out of her chair, falling to her knees and reaching out toward the officers, weeping frantically about how she was only trying to protect her baby girl. The facade of the untouchable socialite melted into the pathetic reality of a terrified criminal. Martin's face turned a violent shade of purple. He slammed his fists onto the table, his supreme arrogance blinding him to reality. "You cannot do this. I will have your badge. Torres, I will tie this department up in litigation for the next decade. Nobody says another word." Torres did not flinch. She stepped right into his personal space, pulled her handcuffs from her belt, and delivered the killing blow. "You have the right to remain silent. Mr. Bishop, I highly suggest you use it right now." The satisfying metallic click of the steel cuffs locking around my father's wrists was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Within an hour, the Stonemere Hills estate was a crime scene. I walked out the front door a completely free woman. The legal avalanche that followed was swift and merciless. Sloane was indicted for felony hit and run, driving under the influence, and fleeing a crash involving severe bodily injury. Martin and Elaine were hit with massive conspiracy, filing false reports, and witness tampering charges. Grant Holloway lost his corporate empire overnight, indicted for evidence tampering and felony obstruction of justice. 6 months later, I accepted a promotion to Senior Director of Global Telematics at Astrogrid. I legally dissolved my fiduciary obligations to the Bishop Family Trust, severed every financial tie, and never looked back. I built a life on data, and in the end, the data set me free. If you were in my shoes at that breakfast table, would you have sacrificed your future to protect the family name, or let the truth do what it was always going to do? Thanks for listening. If this story resonated with you, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And if you want more revenge stories like this, please like, subscribe, and support the channel.